Hi everyone, my name is Nick Nicholas and I'm here with my son, Chris Nicholas. And we're going to share some things with you today and over the next several of these podcasts that we have found to be life-changing to most people. And so we want to share that with you. So Chris, thanks for coming all the way from Joplin, Missouri to Sun City, Arizona. How do you like the heat?
The heat is good. I would rather have the heat than the cold.
Yes, you don't have to shovel snow in Arizona. So you and I have been talking about this stuff for over 3 years now.
Yep.
And so let me kind of explain where my mind is as to how to handle this and why I think it's so important and the best way to get the information out to the people. Okay.
Sounds good.
Obviously, you're not old enough to remember this. Thank goodness. However, this country at the current time is going through a lot of angst,
Yes.
a lot of anxiety. We've got the political turmoil, whatever that is. We've got the coronavirus. We've also got the civil unrest, and all of those things are going on.
Yep. But
They're added on top of what goes on, the normal anxiety that goes on within a family. Just the normal everyday stuff. Are we going to have the money to get the kids in college? Making sure that we get them in the right schools, or how are things going at work? Are we a two-family or one-family income? That sort of thing. So I got to looking at this over the last couple of months or so, and I came to understand something. Of course, I'm old enough to remember part of this because I'm 78 years old. I was born in 1942. So the war had already just started, World War II, and I don't remember any of that, obviously. But what I do remember is as I reached about 4 or 5 years old, I remember my parents and my grandparents talking about everything that was going on in the country during the Depression and during World War II. And there was an enormous amount of anxiety and fear because there was so much unknown. Were we going to win the war? Was the financial situation ever going to straighten itself out? Well, I got to thinking about that because I'd had a lot of input over a number of years from my, like I said, my parents and grandparents. And I got to thinking that we're experiencing the same type of anxiety, the same type of fear, almost to the point of panic, that they did early on in the World War II. And so I got to think, I can remember being told that what really helped everybody the most to get past that was what President Roosevelt did. Pardon me. He, 11 times between 1933 and 1944, he went on the radio and had what he called a fireside chat. And basically what he did, it was to help allay the fears and help the country understand what was going on and the best way for them to handle it so that they could go on with their lives as normally as possible. So I got to thinking about that. He did these fireside chats. Even today, some people still talk about them. How do you do that same thing in the current environment? I mean, the family no longer gathers around the radio at night after dinner.
No.
I mean, most families don't even sit around the table after dinner. So what is the method for doing that? So at that point, I got to thinking about, and then you and I talked about, the possibility of doing it in the modern way, which would be through podcasts. And so for that reason, came to the decision that we would do what we called fireside chats or video fireside chats, and we do them through the podcasts. And so for those of you out there, you can probably see the fake fire. I'm sure Roosevelt used a real fire, but this is Arizona, and I'm not about to build a fire.
And it's going to be 111 degrees today.
Yes, it is. So I don't think we need a real fire, and I don't feel any heat coming off my television set. So, but it's to set the mood, to set the idea, and to share information. The whole idea being that with what I've learned over the last 40, 50 years, and what you've learned by using many of the concepts we're going to talk about, it can change people's lives.
Absolutely.
Completely. And so I think the best way to do this, I'm going to start off by, so that everybody will understand where this came from. Start off by telling my story, and then after I finish that, I'm going to have you tell your story. And then as we go forward, we'll talk about how the concepts have helped you, how they've helped others, and how the folks that are watching these podcasts can actually take that information and have the same positive experience. Okay?
Okay.
So, my story, kind of interesting, and it went on for a long, long time. Part of it, obviously, you already know. And what happened was that first of all, between my junior and senior year of high school, I was hit with my first real negative thing in the world. I was raised in a Christian home. And I was taught right from wrong, I was taught ethics, I was taught character, I was taught all of these things. I grew up on a farm outside of a small town in southeast Kansas in the 1950s. That kind of gives you some idea of my background. And then in the summer between my junior and senior year of high school, my mother went to the hospital for an operation, and the day before she came home, she died. And it was so sudden, it was just like, wow, I don't understand. And believe it or not, I felt betrayed. I felt betrayed. And it was the first time that I ever questioned God. Wait a minute, why are you doing this to me? Well, shortly thereafter, I found out some information about the girl that I had been dating, mostly through high school, and had even thought about getting married, my second betrayal. And so that was the second time I questioned God. Well, later on, I went away to college and did all kinds of crazy stuff that college kids do. And then I got married, and we were together for 8.5 years, and then I experienced another betrayal. This time, though, it hit me so hard, I did more than just say, hey, God, I'm not sure I believe in you anymore. It hit me so hard that I literally walked away from a very high-paying job, company car and expense account, quit the job, turned in the car, and went into the homeless community. I was in the homeless community for about almost 2 months. Almost 2 months. Now, don't get the wrong idea. Homeless community in a town of 35,000 in 1968 is a whole lot different than being homeless in Phoenix, Arizona in 2020. But still, homeless leaves you feeling hopeless. There's nowhere to go. It's like nobody cares, all of that. So I didn't think anybody cared about me, so I found two really good friends, Bud and Jack. Weiser and Daniels. Bud Weiser, Jack Daniels. They were my closest friends. And they kept me from having to dwell on all of the negative things in my life. And I thought that was, that was okay. I was numb. I didn't feel I was trying to kill the emotional pain. Didn't realize it at the time, but that's what I was doing. So one morning, late November 1968, I woke up in an alley behind the Federal Building in Joplin, Missouri. Cold, I was freezing, and I needed coffee. I had the mother of all hangovers, and so I got up, I brushed myself off, I went into the Federal Building looking for coffee. And it was early enough, there was only one office open, and I could smell the coffee, and I just went right in. The guy offered me a cup of coffee, and then it dawned on me that it was an Army recruiting station. Well, Norman Bell took advantage of my hangover, took advantage of the fact I was freezing, and most of all said, look, you don't need to be homeless. 3 days later, I'm in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and my military career started. That was my first real step back from all of the devastation that I experienced. Now, the problem was that even though I was in the Army, and you probably heard it said, and you've been in the military, you can experience it too, you can be around 1,000 people and still be lonely. And that's where I was. I really didn't care if I lived or not. So I'd had these 3 major betrayals over a period of about 8 or 9 years. And as a result of that, I just basically gave up on life. And I allowed at that point, I didn't realize it, but looking back I realized that I allowed fear to control my life for the next 28 years. And that was pretty miserable stuff. But then in 1980, that all changed. After 28 years of doing things I'm not proud of, and things that I probably never should have done, I found myself at Fort Ben Harrison, Indiana. And I was there temporary duty, doing some training and as an instructor. And I was staying in a motel where they had all of us trainers billeted. They also had a couple classes billeted there. And one morning at breakfast, I looked up, and down the hall coming into the restaurant, into the hotel's restaurant, was what I considered to be an angel. Strawberry blonde, beautiful. God, it was like, okay, that's it. And that's when I met the woman that I now have been with for 40 years. And she was helping me and did help me through all this tumultuous stuff. Matter of fact, at our last anniversary, I posted on Facebook, I said, 40 years ago, someone left the door to heaven open and an angel floated to the ground, landing softly in my tumultuous life. I gazed into her soft brown eyes and I knew that my life had changed forever. And she spoke to me, and when she did, the spark between us molded our two hearts into one, and it was a union by God. And it has worked out that way since. Now, I'd like to think that my life was perfect after that, but life doesn't work that way. So what happened, I continued to have my issues. I had a lot of things to get rid of, but she was very understanding, and she was there, and she supported me, and she worked with me. And ultimately, I found myself, pardon me, I found myself where all of a sudden I had all this good stuff going on, but I had all this bad stuff pushing back against it, and the pressure of the two, I was at that time running the second largest Army recruiting station in the United States in Lowell, Massachusetts, and on the way to work one morning, March 15th, 1981, I crashed. All I wanted to do was die. I thought I was going to die. I had chest pains. I was sweating, doing all that. I didn't know what to do. So just as that I had nowhere else to go, I heard a voice that said, "Get help." And I didn't really know how to do that. I didn't have any reason. At that point, I couldn't find a reason to go on. And then a thought popped in my head. My reason for living was 1,000 miles away. And that obviously was the woman I'm married to now, because she, military also, she was assigned to Fort Gillem, Georgia. So I went back, talked to a priest, told him what was going on, and he said, "Son, your life's really screwed up." I said, "I know that." And he said, "But I can't help you." Now, when a priest tells you they can't help you, that's kind of scary. He said, "No, it's way above my pay grade," and he was a full colonel. So, but he said, "No, who can?" So he picked up the phone. And it's amazing what goes through your mind when you're under high stress. I thought, wow, does he have a direct line to the man? But where he called was over to the 10th Special Forces Group Stress Center. Now, they had a detachment there that was doing all kind of assignments, and the guys coming back were going through counseling before they went home. And they didn't take anybody outside of forces. And so when he talked to them, they weren't going to take me at first. Then they found out that early in my career I had some special forces background, or had forces background, different than what we know today. But nonetheless, they accepted me, and for a year I worked with a special forces counselor. And that was the next step on the way back. But as a result of that, I ultimately decided that there had to be more than what I knew. And so for the next, 12, 13 years, I worked with a Christian psychologist. And the interesting part of that was that I started to see life in a whole different perspective, a whole different light. And then, so I'm continuing to grow and everything's going like that. There were some other things we'll talk about a little bit later that I learned that turned out to be very instrumental in what we're doing now. But everything I've shared with you up to this point is critical in that it laid the foundation for what we do now. As I look back on it, as those negative things were happening, I'm thinking, ugh, Lord, why are you dumping all this stuff on me? What did I ever do to upset you? Mm-hmm. And I actually blamed him and was very unhappy with him. But as I look back on it, I realized every one of those challenges they were not negative, even though I felt they were. They were positive because they were part of my preparation to be able to do what I do now. So that's a little bit about my background. We'll get more as we go on, but I know that you've got some things you need to share about what's happened in your life and how you came from a very dark place to where you are today. So go ahead and share that.
Well, I wasn't around during the Great Depression, World War II, but you know, that's your fault.
I
Not
know.
mine.
I just wasn't old enough to make it happen. Sorry about that.
So I won't hold it against you this time. But it's interesting. All the things that you went through, had you not gone through those, I wouldn't be sitting here today.
That is true.
And I can say that honestly. So my background being, I enlisted in the Army before my senior year of high school. Wanted the college money, but I got a lot more out of it than just the college money. So I spent 4 years in the 82nd, jumping out of airplanes, infantry. I got out, I went to college, and then spent the next 18 years in corporate America, climbing the corporate ladder. Had been married 20 years, and marriage fell apart. So I was kind of down, kind of tired of corporate America. Something that I always ask myself, because I was in during the Cold War. And we, at one point, were headed to Grenada, then not, then going, then not, and they ended up sending us to Europe as a show of force to the Russians that we could be fighting in Grenada and in Europe to protect Europe. So long story short, I found myself in late 2004, early 2005, with a war going on in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I said, this is my chance to find out, do I really have what it takes to be a combat leader? So I joined the Guard, Tennessee National Guard, volunteered for Iraq. I joined in February, volunteered in March, received my orders in April, and left in May. And hooked up with my unit. My unit was actually out of Utah. So I didn't know anybody when I went in the unit. We deployed, and everybody that deploys to the Middle East will always go through Kuwait first. It's kind of a staging point. You can finish doing all the administrative stuff that needs to be done, re-zero your weapon, acclimate to the weather. You know, sun rises a little before 5 in the morning in Kuwait, and it's 100 degrees already. So Arizona heat is a little bit less than the Middle East. So we spent a couple weeks there, and then it was time to finally get into Iraq. And you had to go in at night because of enemy forces taking shots at aircraft that were inbound. So we load up and we head out. And as we are on final approach into Al Taqaddum, which is located between Fallujah and Ramadi, we were headed into Ramadi. Our plane was hit with enemy fire. So the Air Force just dropped the plane. They just cut power and just let the plane fall out of the sky in order to get out of their line of sight. Guys ended up in the roof of the aircraft. Some of them had taken their seatbelts off on the 2-hour flight. It was chaos. We landed. Pilots got off. I got off right behind the pilots, and right behind where I was sitting, there was a hole in the fuselage. So right there between Fallujah and Ramadi that night, I came to the conclusion that I wasn't coming home. That my whole job for the next year was to make sure that my guys did. That it wasn't happening for me. And at that point, I had no fear. It was a foregone conclusion what my destiny was, so I didn't worry about it. So throughout that year, whether it was small arms fire, IEDs, RPGs over my head, blowing up behind me, mortars. I didn't worry about it. I just did my job, took care of my guys. Well, God had other plans for me, and I did come home.
Mm-hmm. I'm very happy for that, by the way.
I'm very happy about that too. I rushed into a marriage when I got home. And there's a reason for that, and it's going to come out in time here. But I rushed into a marriage, and I spent the first year back, like a lot of guys, waking up every morning wishing I was back in Iraq. I could handle the blood, the bombs, the bullets. Reacclimating and transitioning back into civilian life was very, very difficult for me. So needless to say, I came home one day from work, and my stuff was sitting in the driveway. It headed me down to a very dark place. And that was the first time that I contemplated committing suicide. We're going to talk about how I came back from that, but I ended up there. She and I ended up reconnecting a year later, remarried, and we're married for 9 more years until the betrayal. And that's what really sent me down the dark place that found me in March, April of 2017 in a hotel room with a gun in my head.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see any reason to live. I was a weak man, unlovable. I didn't deserve to be alive.
Mm-hmm.
So what do? I pick up the phone and I call my dad. And that's when you started sharing this with me. And I'm excited about, as we get into the next couple of podcasts, we're going to talk about how that played out. But it's been 3.5 years now,
Yes.
and I don't necessarily see all of it. You see it, and others see it. Because I have to live in here, and I still see some of the weakness, but I am at a greater peace
Mm-hmm.
than I have ever been. And I wouldn't be sitting here today if I hadn't had gone down this path.
Right.
So I have to say thank you, and I'm very excited about it.
Well, obviously, as your dad, you're very welcome. I'm very happy I was able to do it for you. But I think both of us have to realize that the one we need to thank is God.
Absolutely.
Because-
Absolutely.
And you'll see more about this as we go through the other podcasts, because I learned a lot about how to make that direct connection with God. I don't have a telephone line to Him, but I have learned how to connect at a whole different level. And we'll be sharing that as we go along. So to kind of wrap this one up, I think you've been in a dark place. I've been in a dark place. I don't think we're the only people in the world that have ever been there.
I think everybody at some point finds himself, now the level of darkness may be different,
Sure. Sure.
but yeah, I think everybody in sometime in their life finds themselves
Right.
in that place.
And over the years, people go through divorces, they go through bankruptcies. I mean, we've had financial upheavals in this country. We've had all of those things go on. And now, of course, we've got this back-to-back-to-back stuff going on. As a matter of fact, my wife, a friend of hers who's a nurse in Florida, posted on her Facebook page, she said, "I'm very concerned and a little worried." And I'm confused, because she said, first it was the virus, then it was the riots, and now they tell me we've got a hurricane coming. So I woke up this morning trying to decide, do I need a mask, a Glock, or do I need a weather radio? And I think a lot of us are facing, I mean, it sounds funny, but everything is so serious it's really not funny.
Absolutely.
But I think a lot of us go through that. So what we're going to do over the next podcast is by revealing our stories and how I came to learn the things that I learned, how I shared them with you, how you utilize those to bring yourself from the darkness to the light, if you will. And by the way, I do a lot of life coaching, and I have worked with over 100 people since January of 2016. They have all experienced positive results as a result of it. Now, and by the way, I will share with the folks out there, if you want the full bloody details of all the crap that I went through and how I made my road back, I wrote a book, published it back in 2018 on Amazon. It's called Reclaiming My Life, My Journey Back to God. And I know you've read this, and I know you use some of the techniques in it to help you to achieve where you're at now. So this is out there if you want all of the little minute dirty details, because they're in the book. I'm very open. I didn't hold back anything. And so you can get that there. But over the next several podcasts, we're going to go deeper into this, and hopefully, and I quite frankly believe that it'll happen, there's a lot of folks out there that I believe are going to be able to make positive changes in their life as well.
Absolutely.
So we'll wrap this one, but we will come back later with more good information.
Okay.